I have heard that Cinderella is dead. I kind of disagree, but it all depends, A, on what your definition of Cinderella is and what your definition of dead is. It might be mostly dead, and it only needs to go see Miracle Max for that chocolate-coated pill that will bring the Dread Pirate Roberts back to life. Matt Brown, Extra Points, is joining us here. I love working in Princess Bride references whenever I can. At Matt Brown EP on Twitter. First of all, sir, it's been too long. Have you recovered from all your travels?
I have. It's funny listening to there. I do feel like the rodents of unusual size would make a great, Big South mascot. That definitely feels like a mascot that America adopts because they're the 14th seed that won a game, right?
I would love that. We need more originality in mascots. I dig terriers. We need other dogs. I need others. Gotta be dogs. I have a corgi and I have a Weimaraner, and they feel kind of left out. So maybe we can work that in. All right, let me ask you that broad question, and then we'll get into something I think you put out about revenue a couple of days ago that I think is very important. Because now all I've heard for the last 3 days is that Cinderella is dead in the NCAA tournament. That's really what we're talking about here, Matt Brown from Extra Points. So tell me, do you think Cinderella is dead?
I don't think Cinderella's dead. It's easy for us to fall into this trap, I think, where we just dramatically overreact to whatever is happening in this one moment. I know, perish the thought, right, in sports media of us overreacting.
Right.
I don't know if we still have this conversation if Derek Queen misses a fadeaway bank shot and Colorado State goes to Sweet 16.
Right.
I don't know if we're having this conversation if Drake had gotten just a couple more breaks and advanced there. I understand why there's the narrative, and it's not just because we have a ridiculously chalky and consolidated Sweet 16 this year.
Right.
But one of the typical hallmarks for a low-major Cinderella run is experience. Where you would have a team of junior and senior future dentists and insurance agents, run off some freshman All-Americans off the floor. It's much, much harder to build that roster now because if they're really good, by the time they're seniors, they're transferring somewhere else and getting a bag. So you might have to have a roster built a little bit differently. But I'm not ready to say that it's dead, even though we've had 2 chalk-ish years in a row.
Yeah, it's funny. We overreact to stuff that Stephen A. Smith says when he parachutes in just for the NCAA tournament, because for him, the entire college basketball universe centers around 3 weeks in March into April. Matt Brown from Extra Points is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. I did this kind of research, this very rudimentary research. First of all, you can't be a Cinderella if you're in a power league. So NC State was an 11 seed last year. Sorry, not buying them as a Cinderella from the ACC, even though they were actually a Cinderella because they weren't going to be an NCAA tournament team until winning the ACC tournament, and even that had some miracle elements to it.
Yeah.
But in the last 9 tournaments, so going back to 2015, we have had 34 what would traditionally be considered 1, maybe 2 bid leagues, double-digit seeds, win a first-round game. Do you know how many of those teams won a second-round game to get to the Sweet 16? 3. So the fact that we don't have, quote-unquote, Cinderella in the Sweet 16 is normal. It's not egregious. It's normal. We've only had 3 of those schools. I have a hard time even counting Florida Atlantic, who was a 9 seed. We all knew they were good, and they got some bracket luck and ended up in the Final Four. But even if we added that, we're still talking about 4. So I think we over-exaggerate just how often that happens.
I think you're right. What makes this year stick out is that it isn't just that there's no double-digit seed, right? It's that I think everybody's a member of just 4 conferences.
That's it.
And that is unusual. You would expect to maybe have a Gonzaga or a Big East team or a St. Mary's that was a 9 seed. That's unusual, but this is. I feel like I've written variations of this column several times over the last decade. It's a single elimination tournament, and college basketball has a high degree of randomness.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna get years like this, and maybe the field is tilted more towards the SEC and Big Ten than it was 5 or 6 years ago. But I'm not ready to definitively write anything is dead, knowing that next year could look very, very different.
All right, so now to what you wrote about revenue. How can we get, and this is not, and because Jay Williams brought up a very good point. He said basically the middle and the lower part of the major conferences now is going to have so much money that they're going to funnel legally through the schools to men's and women's basketball programs. They're going to be able to do that. How can the middle and the top of those 1 or 2 bid conferences, the mid majors, how can they combat that by raising enough money to keep some of their better players from going to big time programs and just be parts of a team rather than being a focus of a team?
Yeah, and this is really difficult because I think it hinges on 3 things. If you're a Belmont of the world, right, or a High Point or something like that, starts at the very beginning with who you recruit. A lot of basketball recruiting specifically, even more than football recruiting, you talk to any coach, is that it's become very transactional. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to avoid that completely. But if you're trying to build a Cinderella type team, you're going to need people that are willing to maybe redshirt, that are willing to be coached and willing to stick around on campus a little bit. And you kind of get a sense for what's important to people, and maybe you have to look for somebody a little bit more academically oriented or who doesn't need the money as badly, that you can stick around. And then you have to build a place that people actually like. This is true in all of our lives.
Right.
When we were picking our own undergraduate colleges, it comes up in our own career. We don't always take the place that offers us the most money, mm-hmm. because quality of life and location and friendships and all those other things matter too. You just need to be within shouting distance and be a place that people enjoy being around and where they feel like they can accomplish their goals. And then you have to make enough money to be able to distribute enough money. And this, I think, is kind of the interesting thing, because we don't have enough hard and fast data about it. But if you're Georgia, or if you're UNC, or you're some major A4 program, you've got the $20-ish million in house money, but you can't spend all of that on men's basketball because you have to spend more than half of it easily on your football team.
No question.
Doesn't matter how much of a basketball school you are. You're going to have to share this amongst other programs. There's going to be some schools in this market that are going to have to spend money on baseball or on some other places.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in the A10, or if you're in the SoCon and you're opting in or something, and you might only have $3 million, you can put a disproportionate percentage of that in basketball, mm-hmm. to where your actual budget might not be that different. You just have to have, I think, a pretty aggressive fundraising department. We talked about a couple of those specific ideas and extra points, whether that's starting a venture fund and essentially backing some student software projects like Louisiana Tech is doing to help pay for their GM software, whether that's getting into the newsletter business like I am and creating new sponsorship inventory to be sold, whether that's being way more aggressive about trying to book your arena. After I wrote that, I had a guy at Colorado State call me up and said, we used ours for prom. And we laughed, like no one's going to get rich booking their arena for one prom. But you get 30 proms, and that's 10th man money. And then you start looking at other things, right? Like you want to have your basketball arena booked a third of the year if you can, and to start giving you more revenue, because there's only so many tickets you can sell if you're George Mason.
Yeah, Matt Brown, Extra Points, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. All of that stuff is true. I know, we had Beyonce here at NC State not that long ago. The Rolling Stones were at NC State. U2. Was it U2? I think it was U2. Was at NC State as well. Hey, I saw
Springsteen there once.
I saw Springsteen in Kenan Stadium in Chapel Hill. I saw the Rolling Stones at Carter Finley Stadium on NC State's campus and at Wallace Wade at Duke. As a matter of fact, I sat next to, at that time, Duke assistant basketball coach Steve Wojciechowski, who sat right next to him randomly. I'm like, holy cow, look who's here. We had an absolute blast. Would collective bargaining help? And by the way, people need to know, NIL, like the collectives, are still going to be part of this whole thing too, right?
Yeah, but to the extent there's still a lot of unanswered questions about that, because the way that the House settlement is structured, assuming this thing gets approved in 2.5, 3 weeks, is that collectives can still exist and athletes can still do deals over the cap.
Right.
But they have to be tied to fair market value, which means that hypothetically, you're not going to be able to get a bunch of donors to pay a left tackle $100,000 to sign 3 autographs anymore. Now, whether that thing is going to be stand up to other legal challenges, and whether there's going to be enough infrastructure to enforce it, I don't know. And I think anybody that tells you that they know is probably trying to sell you some software.
I would probably just say it's probably not going to be enforceable because the NCAA has done a poor job of that historically. Yeah. I also will say this definitively: collective bargaining would help the schools at least as much as it would help the athletes, but they don't want to go that route, and I still can't wrap my mind around that. All right, something you wrote today, because time is short. I want to be able to get this in. St. Francis, who just got, last-second buzzer beaten in the first 4 by Alabama State. St. Francis of Pennsylvania is reclassifying back to Division III. They didn't want to play this game anymore, and I get it. And there's a lot of schools, I think, that would like to do that for various reasons. Maybe won't because of the image. First of all, what do you think St. Francis went through? And how many other programs, especially in basketball, that don't have football ties, or schools that do have football that maybe don't want to play these games? How many schools do you think might do this?
Well, so there's I think we could, both of us off the dome could probably come up with a list of 20 schools that probably should, but you're exactly right. Historically, it's very rare for this to happen because you face such an enormous political hit. And I talked to people at St. Francis yesterday, on the record and off the record, who, big surprise, are saying, the initial response has been pretty negative, right? We're going to lose a lot of students. We're going to lose coaches. There are hundreds of people on this tiny campus that are here because we're Division I. We have a long history at this level. It hurts. There's no way around that. What I can share, though, is there are a number of schools, mostly in the Northeast, but not exclusively. I know a couple in the Southeast and maybe one not too far from here that have very quietly and above the athletic director level had some of those kind of conversations. And now you're at the point where some of these boards are putting out very quiet RFPs to consulting companies to help crunch the numbers and look at it. And it's the biggest reason. Every school is different, but the biggest reason is the cost curve for Division I membership is just going up at a rate that at some point not everybody can swing, especially because higher education is not really in a great place generally. So when you have a lot of these places in the Northeast, it's more expensive. You're recruiting fewer number of students to potentially go to these schools. They're shrinking every year. You could afford to do it in 2007. Now you probably can't afford to do it in 2030. And if you've got a Division II or Division III league that fits your profile, it might make sense. I mean, you don't really think of the NEC as some gigantic, sprawling conference, but St. Francis is making 6-hour bus rides all the time. And you don't go to a middle-of-nowhere school in Loretto, Pennsylvania, to be on the bus until 4 o'clock in the morning. You're going for a holistic liberal arts experience. And it's hard to do that, given what D1 is right now.
Matt Brown, Extra Points. He mentioned newsletter. Get it. Because if you are fascinated, as I am, by the inner workings, the financial implications, and everything behind the scenes in college sports, this is the newsletter for you. At Matt Brown EP on Twitter. Sir, we got to do it again because I have 1,000 other questions that we don't have time for today.
All right, we'll hit you up next time then. Thanks for having me.